And welcome back to another episode of The Credit Authority. Once again, I am your host, Rhonda Kulch, and I am so glad that you tuned in today. So we always want to get started by thanking our sponsors. So thank you so much to Equity First. If you are experiencing credit and or financial challenges for yourself or for your business, feel free to reach out to any one of their trained professionals. They can be reached by dialing 631-714-4822. And we also would like to thank the Boss Network. Today's guests have all been members and are currently members of the Boss Network. And our final guest today is Don Gelestino, and he is no different. So Don, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Rhonda, glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, you've been on the show before. We've met over the years a handful of times. I know that you're a member of the Boss Network. We know that you are, the guy behind Champion Elevator. And when we hear about elevator systems, it's not the first thing that we go, wow, that's a sexy business. But you are a serial entrepreneur. So that's really what I wanted to focus on today, is speaking to you about entrepreneurship and really what goes behind your ability to be creative in thinking about the next opportunity. So tell us where your journey started with your first business.
Yeah, so I actually kind of got into the elevator business, I would say by default. My family, when I was a senior in high school, we up and moved to Maine. I had to graduate from high school in Maine. And when I showed up in Maine, most of my classmates were all going into the military, a lot of Marines, a lot of Army guys. And, I showed up on the scene with my hair was probably about 3 foot long. I could tuck it in my pants when I was standing up, and I wanted to be a rock and roll bass player. That was my goal in life at that time. I used to practice about 12 hours a day. So right after high school, I left my house, ran away to New York, and was going to be this rock and roll bass player. So I started out by playing shows all over the place. And I was really doing great with the music world, but I was making no money, and I was sleeping on the couch of a couple of guys for about 3 months, and they said to me, Don, you've been here for 3 months without paying any bills. You got to come to work with us. And I said, well, what do you guys do? And they said, well, our father owns an elevator company. And next thing I know, I was in the elevator business. So, like it or not, I was making $4 an hour, which was more money than I was making playing music. So, I jumped in, and everything I've always done, I really like working with my hands. I had a paper route when I was 8 years old. I was selling fish. Like I would go to the creek, catch like little spearing and killies, and sell that on my way home from school. Even back as far as third grade, I was selling like bait fish to like the bait and tackle shop.
Yeah.
So I always had these little things. I was cutting lawn, shoveling snow, all the little things you do as a kid. But I always had, this little entrepreneurial flair. When I was in high school, I started a company selling jewelry. It's just been something that's kind of in my DNA, and I think for most entrepreneurs, it's kind of like that, where it doesn't, I know this is going to sound really wacky, it doesn't matter what it is if you're going to be like a dog on a bone with it. And I've had some great things that blew up and, became amazing. And then I've had things that were like, wow, I wish I never did that. There goes $400,000 down the tube. So, disasters. Like my wife will always let me remind me of those crazy things I had, came up with that really didn't go anywhere. But always the hit rate is more than, the pros outweigh the cons, and you're firing on all cylinders with at least 70% of your stuff, all your deals, you should do good. And that's that's the way, I kind of roll.
And you're hitting it on the head. And I do bring on a lot of entrepreneurs onto the show. And we always go back to the same question. And even when I'm a guest on somebody else's show, they'll always say to me, well, you've probably had failure along the way. Would you go back and change it? And I'm sure your answer is the same as mine, as the same as every other entrepreneur, which is no. Why would you ever want to change something? It's not really going to change the trajectory. You learn from every one of those experiences. So 400,000, I don't want to learn from, right? But you learn from those experiences and how to best protect yourself so that your next adventure maybe will, be a little smoother, right? You don't have the same hiccups. So when you developed Champion Elevator, I know you started mentioning how you got involved. Tell us a little bit about what the challenges were for you to really start and venture out on your own.
Yeah, so my first elevator company was Vertec Elevator, which I started in 1993. And that was after being in the elevator business for 7 years. And that started out from day one as a major challenge because the elevator company that I worked for, I actually worked there for 6 months without a paycheck, without medical, dental, any kind of benefits. I would take my paycheck, go to the bank, try to cash it. They would tell me they can't cash it because it was uncollected funds. And literally 2 weeks before my wedding, which I was paying for myself, by working odd jobs on the weekend, doing roofs and decks and, patio blocks, whatever I could come up with just to help pay my bills and pay for my wedding. I actually gave my 2-week notice to my old employer, went to the county clerk and started a company called Vertec in 1993. And it was really man with a van. I took all of my wedding money, and when I came back from my honeymoon, I just went out there and I was subcontracting work for a bunch of other elevator companies. And the elevator company owners knew I was a very reliable and good resource, so I found work pretty easy. The big challenge I had was as I was trying to scale that business, every elevator that I went to look at for my own service contract ended up being one of the people who provided me subcontracted work. It was their elevator. So I called them up.
So you couldn't shoot you can't, what is it? You don't want to shoot the hand that feeds you.
Yeah, so I would call them up and I'd say, hey, ABC Elevator, you better call Mr. Schwartz. He's not happy. If he's calling me, he's probably calling other people. And, this happened a lot. And I'll tell you what it did for me, though. With my competitors, it gained a level of respect. Like they said, hey, here's a guy that could have easily took the contract. Instead, he called me. He appreciated it. And, we worked together like that for years. And what happened is I actually ended up going back and buying my first employer, the company that I couldn't even get my paycheck from. I ended up buying that company, and that turned out to be really great. I bought that company in 1994, and to this day, the owner of that company still works for me here at Champion Elevator. So these are the kind of relationships I try to build, very long-term relationships. The regular things, I have no college education. I never went to business school. I never really knew what to do, but I learned a lot of what not to do. And that's kind of the challenges that I've had, kind of built major cash flow problems. Starting up, I didn't realize you had to have overhead added into the equation on your pricing. That was a huge challenge for me early in the game, around 2000, 2001, it was rough. And then, manpower and things like that. But, the more you dig in, the more you start to develop the skills to, kind of know what you're dealing with. And you can get past those challenges quickly, later on in the game.
I love it. I love it. So, lesson of the day, work with high levels of integrity and grow from every opportunity that is put in front of you. So, once again, we are speaking with Don Gelestino, Champion Elevator, serial entrepreneur. And with that in mind, that concludes today's episode of The Credit Authority. Thank you so much for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next week.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.